In June 2019, the causal agent of sudden oak death, Phytophthora ramorum, was detected in rhododendrons that were shipped to 60 Walmart stores across Kansas and the Home Depot store in Pittsburgh, Kansas. This is the first introduction of Phytophthora ramorum into Kansas. The disease is a threat to Kansas forests and landscapes. Currently, no trees are affected by sudden oak death. I'm Ryan Armbrust, the Forest Health and Conservation Forester with the Kansas Forest Service. This week I sat down with Jeff Wichman on Agriculture Today to answer questions about sudden oak death and what Kansans can do to protect our forests.
Concerned with something that has a shocking name as sudden oak death, that this could have an impact. We don't often think of Kansas as being a forested state, but of course we have about 4.5 million acres of forest in the state, and we have a number of oaks that are important parts of our community and our rural forests. And when we get something that's never been in the state like Phytophthora ramorum, also known as sudden oak death, it certainly makes us concerned.
Walk us through it. How did this all come about?
Well, we received word from our friends and partners at Kansas Department of Agriculture that at some point this spring, a number of Walmarts and one Home Depot in the state of Kansas received a shipment of rhododendrons that ultimately were sourced from the West Coast, passed through a nursery in Oklahoma, but they came into the state and were distributed. As it turns out, they had Phytophthora ramorum present in those plants.
And this will do what? What is actually being caused by this, I guess, pathogen?
Mm-hmm. So Phytophthora causes various levels of blight on the many different plants it infests. We know that it can infest at least 60 different species and types of plants. The most significant is on red oak trees or trees in the red oak group in California. It can cause rapid death, cankers, and limb dieback. On a lot of other horticultural and nursery plants, it just causes what would look like a blight, some leaves turning brown and dying, some tip dieback, but ultimately it doesn't cause large and significant mortality on nursery plants. Unfortunately, it does cause oak mortality, and we don't know yet exactly what that would look like in the central part of the country here because it's never been here before.
So where do we go from here then? If it's never been here before, what are we telling people to do? I assume the first thing is to make sure if you bought one of these rhododendrons to bag it and dispose of it.
Absolutely. If you bought a rhododendron this spring, anytime April on from a Walmart in Kansas or from the Home Depot in Pittsburgh, you should absolutely dig that up, including the root ball, put it in a trash bag, put that in another trash bag and dispose of it either by burying it or taking it to an approved landfill. And you should make sure you clean your tools and sanitize your tools and any boots or anything else that came into contact with the soil at that point. The good news is right now it's only been detected on those rhododendrons. We don't know of any cases where it's escaped out into the woodlands, and that's very good. And that's a point I really want to emphasize. Sudden oak death sounds really bad, but it's not in our oak forests yet. And we want to take as many steps as we can to ensure that it doesn't get into those forests because, well, we're not sure that it would cause widespread mortality. Our oak forests are very important, and we don't want to lose them.
And this would be primarily in the eastern part of the state?
Due to the life cycle of Phytophthora and kind of the environment it requires, it has to have red oak forests. It really persists in areas that are humid and wet. That's really the eastern part of the state. So we're not really concerned with what may happen should this be introduced, in Dodge City, for instance, because we just don't have the susceptible red oak type forest there. But in the eastern part of the state, we absolutely have a lot of red oak, Shumard oak, pin oak, really anything in that red oak family. That's the area that we're concerned about because we have the oaks there and we have the wet weather that would really cause Phytophthora to perhaps thrive should it get established.
There is not just a Kansas issue. This is an issue that is spreading to several other states.
Yeah, unfortunately, this same large shipment it looks like got distributed to, at last count, 18 different states. So in some ways, we're fortunate we're not the only ones in this boat, but it certainly is a risk for the central hardwood forest type all across the middle part of the country where there are a lot of red oaks. And hopefully this can get contained by a lot of the State Department of Agriculture and universities working in those 18 states.
One of the things you told me before we started recording was the fact that the good news is there's no disease triangle. Explain that.
Yeah, I often use this example where we're familiar with the fire triangle where you have to have fuel and a source of ignition and oxygen in order to have fire. And fire extinguishers work by eliminating, a source of oxygen for that. So the disease triangle is similar where we have to have a pathogen, we have to have a suitable environment, and we have to have a susceptible host. Well, we know now that we have the pathogen. Phytophthora, we know, showed up on these rhododendrons. We perhaps have a susceptible host in our red oaks. We're not certain yet. And we may have a favorable environment in the eastern part of the state where we have that wet weather. But the good news is, to this point, we don't think that that pathogen has been put in contact with those susceptible hosts. And that's really what we're trying to prevent here. We're trying to get those rhododendrons out of the environment before they really have the opportunity to spread the Phytophthora potentially to our red oaks.
Because this is so much in the news right now, is there the concern that anytime somebody sees something out of the ordinary, they're going to jump to SOD as being the cause?
Absolutely, and we saw this repeated a little bit when we first had emerald ash borer in the state, that anytime an ash tree looked a little bit off, the suspicion really was that it was emerald ash borer. There are a number of things that can cause our red oaks to look a little bit off, to have a few leaves die back, to have a little bit of limb die back, or develop a canker even, and those are certainly concerns. We want our red oaks to be vigorous and healthy. But anything that looks out of the ordinary in a red oak is not necessarily going to be sudden oak death. We would encourage people to keep a close eye on their oaks and work with their county extension agents and their tree care professionals to monitor their oaks for this. But we don't want everybody who sees a red oak that looks wrong in the landscape to send it into the lab for samples, or to assume it's sudden oak death, and certainly not cut it down because they think their tree is going to die.
Well, then we don't really know how to do the disposal if we got to that point, do we?
No, we don't. We're still kind of learning this as we go, because thankfully we haven't had sudden oak death in this state yet. But the good news is that sudden oak death has been pretty well explored and understood in California for a while. So should it come to be established, we've got some pretty good management guidelines I think we could begin to engage in. But it's still very early to really be taking any of those steps yet. Right now, we're very much just encouraging people to remove those rhododendrons and to keep an eye on their landscape and make sure that we don't get that pathogen out there. We don't have anything to manage yet on our red oaks because sudden oak death is not established in our forests.
And even though this came from a nursery, a lot of them went out. It is only confined to those ones in Walmart's and the one in, I think it was Pittsburgh.
Yeah, it is. So if you had a rhododendron that you planted 3 or 4 years ago and now it's starting to look bad, it's unlikely that this is sudden oak death. If you have a lilac that you planted this spring, again, this was only on rhododendrons, so we're probably not as concerned about it. So anything you planted this spring doesn't necessarily need to be removed and burned out of the landscape. We're really just focusing on those rhododendrons from the Walmarts and the Home Depot in Pittsburgh. At this point, that is the only source that we know of that's out there that is infested.
So really at this point, we're just trying to make people aware that this is existing, and really to get people who did buy one of those to take care of it.
Absolutely. That's our priority at this time, to identify all those plants that are out there that we know to be infested and remove those. And there'll be quite a bit of follow-up scouting and work done afterwards to make sure that those plants didn't actually spread it to anything else in the landscape.
And as you mentioned, if you do have questions, they can contact the Forest Service or just go through the extension agents.
I would encourage people to feel free to contact their extension agents, and if they have any further questions, they can contact the Kansas State Plant Pathology Department. They can contact me at the Kansas Forest Service. We're all here to really help people understand their best management tactics and best steps going forward to really preserve all the great plants in our landscapes and all the valuable red oaks in our forests.
All those folks and KDA that you mentioned earlier, you're really all working on this together, because it's something that I said at the beginning just kind of blew up on Friday.
Absolutely. We're very fortunate in the state of Kansas. We've got a really good relationship between a number of agencies and universities where we were able to come together and really have a cooperative response to this quickly. We really set that groundwork, I think, through some other things we've worked through in the past, including emerald ash borer. And all of our objectives at the end is to really preserve the resource and have that best service to our citizens in Kansas, so we can all have these good resources going forward.